All right, good morning. All right, so my name's Chris Skoglund. I'm the Director of Energy Transition with Clean Energy New Hampshire, nearing the end of my second year. I have taught 7th grade, so I expect way better behavior from all of you. So as you come in, there are some seats that are still in the front, so Dale and others that are trying to hide in the back, you can come on in. Anyway, so as mentioned, with Clean Energy New Hampshire, but very excited about this panel today. I organized 3 panels for this conference, and this is the one that I kept for myself. Doesn't mean it's the best panel, it's just the panel that I'm most interested in hearing about. And the reason is because this is as close as potatoes as you can get to the energy system. Potatoes are my favorite food because you can grow them pretty much anywhere, and they will last for 12 months or longer. So, like, they're a survival food, but they also come in a lot of different varieties. I have 12 different potatoes that I still need to dig up. They range from like purple potatoes to white potatoes. Some are good for baking, some are good for mashing, some are good for frying, some are just really pretty and you can use them for anything. And the panel today is a lot like that because we're going to be talking about storage, which for a long time has been talked about as kind of like this magical thing. But right now, it's here, and we are going to hear from our panelists about how it is being used for a bunch of different varieties. It comes in different flavors, and it is used in different applications all across the landscape. But again, the most important thing is it's as real as potatoes are. It's not some fantasy technology, but it's being deployed now. But like in my house, where potatoes are like the heart of every meal, it's going to be a critical part of the energy transition. Because for the longest time, electricity has been something that needs to be consumed at the rate that it is produced, or the grid goes down. Now we finally have an opportunity to manage energy with the new intermittent clean sources that are going to be coming online and using it to better manage the entire energy system, better manage and utilize the existing distribution and transmission system that's in place. Now, rather than give an entire hour and 15-minute talk, as I seem to be about getting ready to, I want to start by introducing my panelists, who I'm very excited to hear more about and have really enjoyed getting to know. Our first panelist is Amy Findlay. She's the manager of Eversource's Demand Response Management Program. And I'm really excited for her to be introducing how batteries are being brought into homes and businesses. Right now, I have a lot of people that want those things in their homes, but they're just not something that pencil quite yet, unless you lose power a lot. We'll also then hear from Yasmin Tayeby, who is the operations manager for Champlain Energy Systems. And in this case, and I apologize, I'm being distracted by the sound from the other room, who's going to be talking about how, as well as Pierre Dennis, Director of Engineering for the commercial and industrial elements of ESS for the EnerSys company. They're going to be talking about how batteries are going to be paired with DC fast charging, how we're going to be able to manage critical issues related to the demand charges that are preventing EV charging from being able to pencil and get deployed before we've got higher utilization rates. We're then going to hear from Ari Jackson, who is the Senior Director of Development for Glenvale Solar, talking about how we are getting to the point where we're not just deploying solar of large-scale projects, but we're actually able to co-locate that with storage. We're getting to a point where we can create projects where we can store the energy rather than delivering it straight to the energy system. And then we'll wrap up with Sarah Jackson, not related to Art, who is the policy manager for the Eastern region for Form Energy. And in this case, we'll be able to hear about a completely different flavor where the iron batteries that they're starting to deploy, which are large scale but long duration, standalone systems that when the wind does not blow and the sun does not shine, we will have access to energy that we did not before. So without going on anymore, I will now turn it over to Amy Findlay.
Okay, you can just put it in. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay? Okay, great. So I, as Chris said, I'm Amy Findlay. I manage the demand response programs at Eversource, which I think most of you are familiar with Eversource. Just a little bit of background here, that we do operate across 3 states, so not only in New Hampshire, but we also have about 4 million customers and 9,500 employees that provide service across Massachusetts and Connecticut as well. So the programs that I manage are within the energy efficiency portfolio, and some of them are within our grid mod, or sort of outside of our energy efficiency portfolio. And it's a level of complexity that I don't expect any of you to sort of remember. So I'm just going to go into some of the different battery program elements that I've sort of encountered with these 3 different programs. So as the opening session mentioned, the Connected Solutions program is sort of the hallmark of our battery programs, and that is across Massachusetts, Connecticut, and very small in New Hampshire, but we're hoping to have more budget to expand that program in the future. So that is one program. Another program is the Energy Storage Solutions program that was launched last year in Connecticut, and the difference with that program, a lot of differences with that I'll sort of explain. The last program that we do have that many of you might not know about is the New Hampshire Clean Energy Fund program. So this is an upfront incentive for installation of both residential and commercial batteries. It came from a result of a settlement for selling some generation assets several years ago. It sort of predates my involvement with these programs, but there is funding available in New Hampshire for batteries for Eversource customers. So I would encourage you to go check out the website or have a conversation with me afterwards if you're interested in learning more about that program. That one is still sort of getting off the ground, and I'll touch on some of those complexities on this slide. Oh yeah,
Which website?
Eversource's website. So if you go to the demand response page, you can see the battery, New Hampshire Clean Energy Fund. You can search it, and there's a commercial tab and a residential tab. So the program offers a little bit different. But I want to talk a little bit about the application process. That's a big difference across the program. So the Connected Solutions program has traditionally ran a post-PTO. So this battery has already been installed. It has permission to operate. And a customer is just saying, yes, I want to participate in your program and earn some incentives for helping to contribute to peak shaving when we call our demand response events, usually in July and August, some of those hot summer days where the ISO New England grid is really peaking. The difference with the New Hampshire Clean Energy Fund and with the Energy Storage Solutions program is that those are an upfront incentive rather than a pay-for-performance sort of model. So you think about the sort of complexities that we're having to overcome with getting the installers, especially on the residential side, the installers of these batteries, set up to be able to sell the customer on and actually fund this sort of upfront incentive versus just an ongoing direct check that we're cutting to the customer. So those are some of the complexities that we're working through to offer this upfront incentive. And that's why the adoption of Connected Solutions, or that program, has been a hallmark, is because it's a very low barrier to entry for customers to just kind of bring their own device and participate versus working through their installer to get the upfront incentive. So we touched a little bit about the application process, incentive structure. The last is a dispatch strategy, and this is really a difference with the Connecticut program. So most of what I've been talking about for dispatching toward events with the ISO New England grid, we're assessing the grid conditions on the daily forecast. You can go to ISO New England webpage and look at their load cast for the next day, and we make the decision, does this look like it's going to be one of the peak days or not? Should we call on these batteries? Because the contracts that we have with our customers, depending on which variation of the program you're enrolled in, will only allow us to call a certain number of events per season, so we can't exceed that threshold. And the passive dispatch for the Energy Storage Solutions program is a manufacturer setting on the battery. At the time that that battery is installed, there's a setting that requires the battery to dispatch every day between a certain time period that we don't have any visibility into, unlike the active participation where we're actually controlling these events. So for that Connecticut program, that's a condition of the upfront incentive, is that you have to participate in this passive dispatch where your battery is automatically discharging. And this sort of gets to my last point about partnerships. And I reference that specifically because we have had a very difficult time getting Tesla to participate in the Energy Storage Solutions Program because of that passive dispatch requirement. So we made that known to regulators, so they took away with the last year's final decision, removed that requirement for passive dispatch, which Tesla was very concerned was going to create a bad customer experience. So I want to make it known here that these battery partners hold a lot of power in the success of our ability to actually dispatch these batteries, because they have to agree to sign their customers up for this. They have to think about what are the minimum requirements, like is this going to put wear on the battery so that a customer's battery isn't going to last as long as we'd originally promised them. Tesla also has a really slick sort of in-app enrollment experience that, because we offer an upfront incentive for that Connecticut program and for the New Hampshire Clean Energy Fund program, they don't want to participate because they don't want this business of having to try to figure out how to pay the upfront incentive and sort of go through our application process there. You also have to think about the motivation for these battery installers to enable this program participation. It's to sell more batteries. Some of these incentive levels that we offer can mean pretty significant checks for a residential customer at the end of this season. Typically, we pay, for the dispatches that we do for July and August, for example, an average residential customer can make about $1,200 a year through the Connected Solutions program. So when you look at that, in your total, or factor that into your overall cost of the battery, if you can participate over time, it really sort of brings down the overall installed cost when you're thinking that most battery systems usually cost around like $15,000 or $20,000. And then I will say just about the large C&I, let's see, what was I going to talk about for large C&I? I've been talking mostly from the residential perspective, but large C&I is really a different play. That's a larger construction project, as I'm sure that some of the other panelists can maybe talk a little bit about there, and then we can get into sort of the incentive levels later on. But I'll stop there and hand it off.
All right, thank you so much, Amy. I'll bring the clicker over, but next up we have Yasmin and Pierre.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasmin Tayeby. I'm here in partnership with Pierre, Denis from EnerSys, and we're going to share this particular presentation here. Champlain Energy Systems, I'm the operations manager, and we are the authorized representatives for EnerSys in their EV charging and BESS systems, battery energy storage systems, here in the Northeast. And as representative, we obviously represent the product, but we also, with our clients, design and develop charging and BESS systems for them and help them to secure federal and state grants, like some of the ones I'll address today, but the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, NEVI, being the largest one. This is, and you'll hear more about it, but this is the EnerSys Express, which is the EnerSys solution to the problem I'm going to talk about here. And this pairs DC fast charging, so level 3, which means anything above 50 kilowatts, DC fast charging with battery energy storage. So first, I'd like to just chat about today's direct current fast charging market, so DCFC market. What's becoming more and more the standard, especially with the way that the grants are being rolled out these days, 150 kilowatts is generally what we're seeing these pedestals are going to be in the market. So what does that mean for the grid? One car charging at 150 kilowatts is the equivalent of 20 regular average size homes. They generally have a load of about 7 kilowatts, so putting 20 homes on the grid at one time is what you're doing when you're charging one car at 150. Not very sustainable. So the effects of the current federal funding for fast chargers. So it's a good thing, obviously. We want to electrify. We want to get these EVs on the road. And the way to do so is by putting more chargers in, because this is the greatest barrier why people are not buying EVs, is they're hesitant, because right now they can't really get around. If they're on road trips, it's almost impossible. I have an EV and I can attest to that. So $7.5 billion are in the two largest programs right now, federal programs. One is NEVI, as I said. The other is the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program, CFI. So together, $7.5 billion over 5 years. Sounds good. Each site is mandated. They have to be 4 by 150 kilowatts, so 600 kilowatts total is what each station is going to be. We know that generally about $1 million is what you can assume for a site with installation and all the rest. So when you take that into account, that ends up being, in the 5 years, 4.2 gigawatts of new load on the grid. We aren't ready for that. The electric grid is not ready for that. And so the question is, how do we fix that? And EnerSys has come up with, we think so far, the smartest solution we've seen on the market. And I will actually let Pierre take it from here to explain a little more about what that system can do.
Yeah, thanks. We looked at the issues of what Yasmin was telling about the grid, taxing the grid with all this additional load. And we also looked at, we wanted a full solutions. So what we did is instead of going to the AC connected DC fast charge, we put a lot of effort on the DC connected. What that means is that the battery acts as a kind of reservoir to minimize the grid, imposing load on the grid. So for a 600 kilowatts, you can go down to a 300 kilowatt connections. So it's a 1-to-2. So meaning that it's going to be easier for the grid to supply the energy for the pedestal demand. And also, it has all the advantage of a battery storage, because as you see, the battery storage also is connected to the grid, so you can use it as as mentioned before, as a peak shaving or application like that, firming loads. So it's a full solution, and in the heart of that solution, we have a energy management system that will manage or direct the power flow depending on some of the criteria that the customer wants. If you want to have peak shaving as the initial or the priority, then they can reduce the load to the EV charging during peak shaving sessions, or if you pedestal is your criteria, your priority for your business, then the peak shaving can be secondary. It all depends on how much reservoir you have, and that reservoir, which is battery storage, is from 600 kilowatts to 1.8 kilowatts. And the grid connection can go from 200 kilowatt to 440 kilowatts. So you can see the value of not reducing the grid, taxing the grid with all this additional load that's coming. It's coming. All these cars are getting sold, and they're all over the place. So that's basically.
It's about the demand.
And then so this is a typical, maybe an example where you have peaks, and a lot of utility will charge you peaks for all the full months if you meet a peak, and then the light green will be without storage, and of course the dark blue will be with the storage, meaning that the battery will shave the peaks. And it's a simple example of savings.
And that's, this is just a nice little photo of the system. And that's it for ours. Yeah.
Steal this back. Sure.
All right. Thank you, Pierre. Thanks, Yasmin. Great to see the interest today. So my name's Ari Jackson. I'm a Senior Director of Development with Glenvale Solar, and I'll be sharing some thoughts that we have today on pairing energy storage with renewables. So for context, it's helpful to probably give some brief overview of the company. We are a small, experienced developer, and we focus on developing solar and battery storage projects, utility scale in New England. Our role in the industry is really centered around siting projects by identifying areas where the grid is capable of supporting them, where they're valuable to consumers, and then also where there's a suitable land use. We're active today in New Hampshire, Maine, and other New England states. And as a company, the goal is to generate as much renewable energy as possible at a low cost, and to do this in a way that's beneficial to the communities we work in. So the benefits of renewables are really twofold. The first is that they are emission-free sources of energy, but also they're the least cost sources of new generation available today. So they're viable technologies in New Hampshire, in New England, and they have the obvious limitation that they only produce energy when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. So this is what we call intermittent. And alone, they're not capable of meeting all of the demands of the grid. So I think this is something that many people find intuitive, but to try to help illustrate that, I've included the two graphics here. So in the upper right, what we have is the New Hampshire's forecasted electric demand for today. On the horizontal axis is the hours of the day. On the vertical axis is power demand measured in megawatts. And what we see is that New Hampshire, as a state, peaks in the morning, dips in the afternoon, and peaks a bit higher in the evening. So the requirement of the grid is to, at all times during the day, exactly mirror that shape. So generators have to supply the energy that's demanded. And below the graph below that is showing a typical generation profile for a solar project in New England this time of year. And as you would expect, it peaks in the afternoon and is limited to when the sun is shining. Now, at low to mid levels of renewable adoption, this doesn't present any challenge for the grid because you have plenty of other generators that are capable of balancing supply and demand at any point in time. But if the goal is to have a very high percentage of the grid powered by intermittent low-cost renewables, this creates a need for storage. And the role that storage plays is to capture energy as it's being generated so that it can supply that energy back to the grid at exactly the point in time when it's needed. So building on that, we can break down further some of the specific benefits that storage provides. And worth mentioning here that there are specific benefits that our projects, utility scale projects, provide versus other use cases such as microgrids or transmission, distribution, investment deferral that are also entirely suitable and important applications for storage, but not the specific cases that our projects are applied for. So there are three main categories that these benefits fall into. The first is being able to absorb energy when it is relatively more freely available and then distribute it back to the grid when it's at a higher value. The second is around being able to ensure that there is energy supply available during times when the grid is peaking. So this provides guarantees that during hours of peak demand, the grid is able to supply what's required by consumers. And then last falls into a category of what are called ancillary services, and these are more geared towards bolstering the reliability of the grid. So given those specific use cases, there are some compelling reasons to pair large-scale energy storage with renewables. And a lot of these are focused around the need to, or the motivation to use as much existing electric infrastructure as possible or using infrastructure that's already planned on being built. So as a practical example, you might look at a solar project. If it has to build a substation in order to connect to the grid, sharing that facility with storage means that you can avoid having to build a substation elsewhere. Similarly, if a solar and a storage project have a shared point of interconnection, they can get more utilization out of existing transmission lines than if they were to have separate points of interconnection. And then, a third example would be if you have a renewable generator supplying more energy than it's able to export, that can be stored and distributed later to the grid. So these are a couple examples, and these are just some brief thoughts that we have on a complex topic, so thank you for listening.
All right, and next we'll conclude with Sarah Jackson.
It is distracting to hear the conversation in the next room.
You want to know what they're saying?
Thank you all for being here. I think this is such an exciting panel. It's great to be a part of all of these awesome ideas and technologies for bringing storage to market and to help us meet our clean energy transition goals. My slide obviously got a little squished, so the words are a little off, but I'm Sarah Jackson. I am the policy manager for Form Energy, and we are a Massachusetts-based company that has offices in a number of different locations now across the country, as well as a brand new manufacturing facility that just broke ground this summer in West Virginia. Form Energy is developing and commercializing a technology, an energy storage technology that can provide energy at capacity for 100 hours. So this is what we're calling multi-day duration storage. The company was really founded by folks who have a ton of expertise in energy storage development. A lot of our founders have been involved in all of these areas you see on the right of the slide. And, really, I think, looked at the challenge of, we've developed lithium-ion and short-duration storage, and it's doing a great job, and it has an incredible role to play. What's the gap that's still left to fill? And so I think what they looked at was, how do we help the grid fundamentally transform for meeting the energy future that we're all planning for? We have extreme weather events. They've become more frequent, more harsh. I think we all remember Winter Storm Elliott and Winter Storm Uri and the impact that had on our grids most recently. During those times, our power supply is becoming tighter. I think we all know that in New England we have winter reliability challenges, as it's harder to get the power we need during the times when people are heating their homes with gas, and that gas is not available to create electricity for us. Also, as Ari mentioned, we have a lot of new intermittent resources coming online, and that's kind of the point. We want to be transforming our grid and having clean energy resources, but they are still intermittent, and there are times when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, and that we need a clean source of energy to be able to back up those new resources. And finally, I think we're all familiar with the transmission congestion. I loved hearing from Champlain and EnerSys about trying to relieve some of that burden as we're building up these new resources we need on the grid, and do it without taxing the grid so much, and so we're able to still meet all those goals. So let me talk a little bit about what Form's battery is. This is a rechargeable iron-air battery. My favorite thing about it is that we get energy from rust. So essentially, the electrochemical process is you have a metallic iron, and when you need to get the energy out, you rust that iron, and when you need to recharge, you reverse that process, and you unrust that iron. Oh, look at all those letters in the way. So if you can't read those little boxes on the side, the sort of exciting thing about this technology is it's a lot about, the cost is really low. Iron, air, and water are the essential components of our battery. These are able to provide energy and storing energy at what is going to be a tenth of the cost that lithium-ion batteries can perform. These are also inherently safe. There's no risk of thermal runaway. The iron anode is inside of a water-based electrolyte, and so you really have a very safe product. Iron is the, I think, second most mined mineral in the world behind coal, and so very, very much available anywhere. There's no geographic restrictions on this technology type. And what's really cool is all the elements are highly recyclable. And obviously, the iron electrode, the iron anode is just very durable. It can last thousands of cycles, and so you have a battery that can really stand the test of time. A little bit just more about what it looks like. So you have on the left the cell, so that's the single anode inside of a little, it's kind of like a plastic milk jug kind of material. It's about 3 feet high, and you have a bunch of those stacked up inside the battery module. which is roughly the size of kind of 2 industrial washer and dryer set you might see in a laundromat. Put a bunch of those inside of an enclosure, set a bunch of enclosures together into power blocks, and then you have what would be a full-scale, large developed field of batteries. So this is sort of what the projects will look like. Form has this amazing strategic analytical team that does a lot of studies to try to show the value. I mean, these are new technologies. I think there's not a lot of value streams that we can take advantage of yet in markets like ISO New England. But one of the things we've been doing is studying what those benefits are. So when you have longer duration and multi-day storage technologies in your portfolio, you have a tremendous reduction in the need of total resources you need to build in order to meet your portfolio needs. So that leads to a much more cost-effective way to meet your decarbonization goals and your clean energy transition goals. We've talked about how it helps integrate renewables. Like all batteries, I think our battery, because of its duration, is particularly well-suited for offshore wind balancing. And I know that this region is planning to build a whole lot of offshore wind in the coming years. It also helps support grid reliability. I think one of the things that it does so well is it's available for long, long duration. So you have a winter storm that lasts more than a couple hours, we can be there to help supply that energy that you need at the capacity you need. Also, see point 2, that reducing, reducing how much you have to build means you save a lot of land impact. And I will say, prior to my job at Form, I worked at the Nature Conservancy. I know how important it is to be able to preserve land and thereby avoid a lot of conflict that you find in communities when you have to build a lot of projects. And we do have to build a lot over the next coming decades. We can also help alleviate transmission constraints with storage. Ari and Yasmin talked a bit about all the ways that we're able to do that with all the different types of storage. And so we need all of those types of storage to help get our system clean while we know the transmission system needs some support. And finally, we can be a replacement for retiring facilities that pollute communities. And I think that, not having to replace those with, new polluting facilities is a great way to come in and serve local air pollution concerns in local communities. And this is just finally a piece from one of our most recent analyses that kind of shows a bunch of the points I was just making in graphic form. I think what it shows you is just how much less you have to build. So if you look at the piece on the right, if you were to have a fully clean, fully renewable future in 2050, you're able to get there at significant reduction in what you have to build and what it costs to get there if you include multi-day storage in the mix. That's all for me at the moment. I'm happy to take questions when we get to that point, which I think that's where we are, right, Chris?
Yes. So thank you all to the panelists. The format that we had discussed is I've got a couple questions. I'm going to actually skip one because I feel like it was pretty well addressed. But I do want to just reflect on how we've really just covered that there is an entire ecosystem of storage that we can integrate into an ecosystem of energy generation. And the point that Sarah was making at the end kind of is complementary of other things that you'll hear in this session, or not in this session, but in this conference, is that the energy transition is going to bring about a wholesale transformation of the vehicle market and the home heating market, where we see more vehicles switching over to electric and more homes switching over to heat pumps. And that electrification of both sectors will drop our overall energy use considerably, possibly by 50% with some models. But it could require electric generation to double or more, which could require quite a lot of wires to be built. As we know, in New Hampshire, wires are not always popular. So the solutions you're all proffering, less investment, less infrastructure. But it sounds like, this is a wonderful technology that we should be pursuing, so why aren't we building? What are for your thoughts, for all the panelists, what are your thoughts on the main barriers to building storage right now in New Hampshire or New England, because we are a regional electricity market, and something that's built in Connecticut may still benefit New Hampshire. I mean, it could be from funding, policy, or education.
Okay. Take it.
And we can do popcorn style.
We were actually just speaking about this last night. Right now, so Amy will know well, she referred to the Connected Solutions program. There are 3 states that are actively incentivizing battery energy storage. It's Connecticut, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. And they're not just doing the kind of programs where you curb your own load, they're actually paying per kilowatt export to the grid. And we, as we're selling these DCFC plus storage systems, while we're waiting for EV traffic to pick up, one of the biggest selling points we give clients is you can make money, you can have revenue streams that come from a different source. And so in this case, it's the batteries. But in all the other states, it's a harder sell, obviously, because the price of these batteries are expensive. So when you talk about states like Mass, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, when you put that model in front of the client, it makes sense and it's profitable. And we're waiting for other states to do that, and it looks like some are. I believe New Jersey has a program coming up soon, Maine maybe, New Hampshire maybe, but we're waiting. And I think that's the biggest thing is right now, there's not too much that, for larger, I can't speak to the residential size, but the larger systems aren't really paying off yet for clients if they want to put in big battery energy storage systems.
I can add to that. So from our perspective, historically there in New England, you've had a relatively low prevalence of renewables and high battery costs. Both of those things are moving in a direction that would support deploying more batteries. And it looks like in a couple of years that we'll probably be seeing a lot more of that. On the side of identifying where the grid can support batteries, this has historically been a challenge. This is what we call interconnection, and it's both trying to identify, an aging infrastructure where that energy could be exported, as well as, nuances of the way in which the projects are studied. And then, a third comment I would make is that they are expensive systems and last for several decades. So there is some, anybody looking to make that investment would be looking for some sort of certainty around the projects continuing to be profitable. And so there is some question of exactly how they'll be contracted over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and sorry.
Go ahead.
I can't see you all over there as well. I'll just add, for our tech, which is much newer and emerging, there's I think the fact that the markets don't support the values that a lot of our batteries bring, and in particular, long-duration storage and multi-day storage don't have a way to get paid in the ISO New England markets right now. We really need state support at the emerging tech side of this, and I think that is going to help bring a lot of these technologies forward. We have states working on targets. A few states have set some goals, but you see where in the states where storage is being driven, it's being driven by state policy. And so I think that's a lot of what is needed. And just not being able to be well compensated or have a revenue stream in the markets right now is really a barrier.
Yep, go ahead.
Specific question to what she just said. ISO New England covers the states that have more solar and more battery supports than New Hampshire. Would it help us in New Hampshire to have ISO agree on what ought to be done and, if you will, pressure New Hampshire? Is that something, or do we need both? Do we need New Hampshire politics to change?
I think, as Chris mentioned, ISO supports the grid, which supports all of our states. So, if Massachusetts adopts a big, robust program, you're going to benefit from that in New Hampshire. But I think, all of the states who want to see this kind of, cost reducing, energy balancing, I think it's technology that New Hampshire should want to see here. And so, yeah, I think that there is definitely every state having its own supportive policies would go a long way.
Yeah, so I think I can talk a little bit about it from the, the programmatic perspective and what I see. On the large C&I side, I think, our Connected Solutions program, as I mentioned before, it's pay for performance, and that's sort of like the compensation mechanism that allows us to offer those incentives, all targets like the ISO New England system peak. So to Sarah's point, if there's a longer duration outage, we don't have the sort of compensation mechanisms built or approved to sort of be able to offer a program that would make that technology a little bit more viable. I think with this pay for performance structure, we know from large C&I developers that, even though we're only paying for a portion of their battery usage, there's revenue stacking that goes on and these different value streams that battery developers all sort of take into account to make these projects pencil out, factoring in like interconnection costs, participation in wholesale markets outside of our demand response season. But we know that our incentives that we offer can make or break the decision for developers to move these projects forward. So I think that while some of our programs sort of masquerade as like a pay-for-performance program, the reality is that they're counting on these like revenue streams for 5-10 years out when you build those models to undertake those projects in the first place. So we saw that with our Connected Solutions program. In our Energy Storage Solutions program, we put a cap on the amount of performance incentive that will pay out. We capped it at 150% of your peak demand. And we saw new applications for those battery programs slow down significantly because we were compensating from behind the meter program that's ratepayer funded, but paying these batteries that probably should have been like a front of the meter asset. And for that reason, we're also developing wholesale distribution tariffs in Connecticut and Massachusetts as well that would allow these larger batteries to not connect to distribution, but connect to transmission, and also being asked to develop, incentive programs that might have some reduced compensation if this sort of behind the meter program were to allow, connection right into transmission and not, get involved in like the retail rates or that compensation structure that we have there. And then I'll just say on the residential side, we're trying to address these barriers to storage, specifically with the Energy Storage Solutions program that we have in Connecticut. We know that Tesla not participating because of certain elements of the program design is a big issue for residential customers, but you also think about, the way that we can motivate customers to participate in this program is, we're sort of 3 steps away. So we've got the incentives out there. We have the battery partners who need to be motivating their installer network to go out there and install these batteries. And most of these batteries, 95% of them, are connected to solar. And these solar installations are a well-oiled machine for a lot of these installers. So to complicate a sale or to complicate an installation by adding a battery where there could be supply chain issues, we suspect that it might be sort of on these residential installers, just not really promoting our battery programs. Also, you look at what the customer's motivation is. We have pretty good reliability with Eversource. We don't have, unless you're in a grid edge situation, a significant problem with outages recently, thankfully. We do a pretty good job with reliability. So that is one motivating factor for customers to get a battery, is the fear of losing power. So if we sort of eliminate that fear because we're providing pretty reliable service, does that also sort of cut down on the motivation to adopt battery technology? So some of the things that we're looking into are actually going to be surveying customers to better assess those barriers on the residential side.
All right, thank you. All right, so we are going to move to questions. I do see hands up. I have 2 questions. I'm going to put those down for a second. My request for the questions is that if you have a question for all of the panelists or a big general question, those are the questions we're hoping to hear. If you have a question that you can corner one of these panelists over coffee afterwards and it's just for them, maybe hold that off because this room is packed and we only have 25 minutes to get through the questions. But I'll start here and then I'm going to have to run, get the question, and then bring my mic back up to my panelists. So I'll start with you, sir, but let me bring the mic to you because we're trying to get your question on the video.
Hi, Chris.
Oh,
Thanks.
hello.
Lou Hitzrow from Exeter Community Power Program. as I heard Jennifer speak this morning, and I hear all of you speaking this morning, it occurs to me that the demand for storage, particularly batteries, is going to increase exponentially. And I wonder, what's that going to do to the cost of storage, cost of batteries, particularly as the supply of resources, particularly lithium, begins to diminish? What do you see in the future as to how we are going to produce all this battery storage?
That's a great question. That's actually one that I didn't ask. So, does anyone want to start? Okay.
Ari's going to go for it.
So my first thought would be that, initially what we've seen is the spur in demand for battery storage, driven largely by EVs, has resulted in investment in supply chain that has reduced the costs. Whether that trend continues or is very difficult to say, but to meet that demand, there's very clearly a need to invest in the infrastructure and supply chain to get the materials that would be needed for that end use. But early signs is we've seen costs coming down quite rapidly. And then this is also something that's been mirrored in other industries. So for us, coming from solar, we've seen initially very early on when the technology is being deployed, having a very high cost. And then what we've seen with modules, for example, is that over the course of 10 years, those costs have continued to decline. But very, very difficult to say. So it's a very good question. Anyone else?
And I'll add just that I think you're going to also see an emphasis on diversification of storage types. I mean, we don't use lithium, we use iron, which is abundant, and I think part of that, the draw of that is some of these challenges, but I think also using the right technology and the right type for the right applications so that you focus your lithium ion where it's got the greatest bang for the buck, and then you look to other technologies that can serve other purposes. And so I think that's diversification of the storage portfolios is going to be really key to helping address those supply chain issues.
Yasmin or Amy?
We can keep going.
All right. Okay, Doria, and then start moving forward. Yes, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Doria Brown from the city of Nashua, and my question is community focused. So I heard a lot of Tesla, a lot of private company focus in this conversation, but I'm wondering how communities are going to be involved in implementing battery storage programs and how we'll be getting resources and funds to communities to be developers.
Any takers on that side?
Go ahead.
Well, one thing I will say is I think municipal, and I think in New Hampshire you say co-ops, New Hampshire, and in Massachusetts we have a lot of municipal utility boards, and so those are utilities essentially run by their towns. And so we've been looking into ways to develop state policies that support grant making to those towns so that they can build the kinds of projects they want to have in their communities. I imagine you could have, programs like that where town, whether they're, an electric co-op or whether they're just a municipality on its own, seeking funding support in order to put in projects like this. I think that could be a really good way to get communities involved and excited about storage.
So, agreed. I think what we've seen, you can take some of what's happening with the EV funding and assume that similar things are going to start happening in the storage side. I would say right now EV is like the hot topic, whether it's charging or the cars themselves. And you're seeing all this funding coming down the pipeline. And for example, $5 billion is to NEVI, but $2.5 billion is to CFI. And that pot of funding is particularly for municipalities, states, towns to actually go in and submit their own plans for EV charging in their communities, and then they get that funding from the federal government. And I do think that you're going to start seeing similar programs happen for storage. as we get more and more used to what storage looks like in our communities.
I can add to that too. So the first thing I'd say is that part of the Inflation Reduction Act involved putting incentives in place for what are called energy communities, and these are areas surrounding retired fossil generators. And then the second thought would be that, we as developers, everything has to be permitted locally, and so you spend a lot of time working with the community to inform them about exactly how a development would take place and what the technologies you're using are. And then when you look at the local benefits, a lot of it comes in the form of economic development, job creation, and property taxes are some of the main benefits that a community would be receiving.
All right. And Representative Corman, do you still have a question, or was it answered? Oh, sorry. It was the gentleman next to you, the other representative. Sorry.
Hi, Chris Munns, State Representative. A number of you mentioned or referenced other programs in other states that have been implemented or that you're involved with in implementing. And I guess I'm wondering, what is preventing you from implementing those in New Hampshire? And as somebody that's in the legislature, are there public policy changes that really need to happen in order for you to do that?
Guess that answered the question.
I could speak a little bit to that. So last year I'd given testimony to the legislature in Maine in support of a procurement they were doing for energy storage. That's something that we're expecting fairly soon. They'll have more details on. It did pass. They were looking to procure, I think it was 300 megawatts. The exact details of it are still being worked out, but that is, I think, one type of program that would help to spur more deployment of this type of technology. Procurement goals. Yes, exactly, procurement goals. Thank you. What is the program? So it hasn't been released. So, but the goal will be for the state to, have contracts in place for a number of energy storage projects, those goals increase over time. So it starts, I believe it was 300, and then 400 megawatts in the following year. But it is something that was passed last spring, and the details are still being worked out. Somebody else here might have more information on the topic than myself.
I think yes was the answer.
Okay. So I think one of the things that we're also seeing at the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission is we need approval for some of these programs from the PUC using the existing statutes that are on the books, like the connected solutions that Eversource already has in Massachusetts and Connecticut was included in the energy efficiency docket that just concluded on Tuesday. We're hoping to get a positive approval for that so we can start rolling it out in New Hampshire. So some of it is just how do we execute existing statutory language, but in a regulatory realm. All right, I'll get to you in a second, but anyone on this side? All right.
Hi, I'm with a nonprofit that helps do-it-yourselfers put solar on their homes. And we have about 400 members, many of whom want to put batteries in their homes, but are finding a real mismatch in regulatory constraints. Some building inspectors say you have to build a fireproof room. Some say, we don't care, just put it wherever you want. Is your industry at all in a position to help educate our regulatory people on best practices for installing bulk batteries in residential buildings?
We are not in a position just yet to do that. However, I know it was a question that Chris had on his original set of questions. I think it's very important whenever we're talking to buildings or property owners about putting these larger systems in, it's often a question, isn't it going to set fire? Isn't it going to catch on fire? And we're constantly having to educate those property owners and the towns that we then have to deal with. No, it's not just going to catch on fire. But there's no consistency, as you say. From town to town, we've been speaking, and a lot of them don't even have any idea. And that alone is a problem, because then it takes a long time to get anything done, because they have to go and check, and then they don't know who to check with. So I don't have an answer for you, but I hear what you're saying, and we've seen the same sort of thing on a larger scale.
So I actually maybe have the answer to that. New Hampshire is very fortunate in that our fire marshal is already active in this space. We just worked with the fire marshal, the Clean Energy New Hampshire solar developers, and some non-members who are also developers, worked with the fire marshal to update the solar code to ensure that we could, completely cover the 50% of the south side of a house, and do it while we were ensuring the safety of fire crews if they needed to access the other side. That's not related to storage, but because we had that relationship, there was a question about EV charging. And we reached out to him and immediately called us back, and we are now part of a conversation related to EVs and fires. And the fire marshal and the president of the New Hampshire Building Officials Association are actively engaged in that. They're not even concerned about storage and fires. They feel like they've addressed that issue. And so it may be just, well, at their level they feel it. At the local level, those questions are not necessarily uniformly understood, and there's not uniform understanding. So if anyone has concerns about fire, perhaps I'm the person to direct your anger and attention towards, and we can work with the state officials to help educate people. We're doing the same with kind of residential solar as well. Over this way.
Thank you. Wonderful panel. I have a couple of questions, really, but I'll try to keep it flowing. I'm from the Pembroke Energy Committee, and I recently became concerned that people aren't really looking at vehicle-to-grid on batteries. Our trash people decided they wanted to get an electric trash truck, which I think is great. But I discovered that the manufacturer they want to use is not willing for that battery to be used that way. And I think the resource constraints are bigger potentially than people are realizing. And if we don't use those kinds of resources because people are just, well, it might affect my battery and I don't want to have to warranty it, we've got to have some kind of policy to encourage that. Geopolitically, we are in a difficult situation with lithium and a much more difficult situation with cobalt. And I'm concerned that both zinc, which has been touted for a few years, and iron are going to take a long time to ramp up manufacturing to get us there. And I just wonder if people are really thinking about that. I mean, a lot of our lithium batteries are coming from China, and there's a geopolitical question there. And other lithiums, Bolivia, which is not always a friendly country for the United States either, and we have very limited capacity right now here. How are we going to answer those kinds of things if they come up? And how are we going to get the manufacturers of large batteries? And like, by the way, Lion Electric, which has a vehicle-to-grid thing, is building a plant, I think, for non-cobalt lithium batteries in Ohio. So that's also going to put a demand on the lithium market, and several other manufacturers, and your attempt to link batteries with solar with EV charging are also going to put big demands on lithium, and I'm not sure we really are going to have that capacity.
All right, you guys have 10 minutes.
You want to? Yeah, go ahead.
For capacity, I'm not sure that, apart from COVID time, which was a very difficult supply chain in lithium-ion, I know there's a big worry about capacity and not meeting the capacity. And for the last 10 years, I think the demand and supply has not matched exactly, but they're meeting themselves, meaning that, of course, we're demanding much more lithium right now, as you know, but the supply it seems to be matching it. There's always, not matching. We're not going to be able to supply to meet the supply, but we haven't seen it apart from take the COVID era, which I understand we had an issue with getting batteries. Right now, I do not see any issue. And like you mentioned, I can't forecast the future, but that supply and demand curves, they seem to be matching. They seem to be matching, and they seem to be matching. It will match. I don't know most of the lithium is coming from China. You're correct, but there is a lot of effort to do it locally. It's not going to happen overnight, but I'm seeing in a couple of years, for EnerSys part, for sure, we are planning to do all our cells in lithium locally, meaning North America. Yeah, and then.
I actually was going to say the same. So for those who don't know, EnerSys is the largest manufacturer of industrial batteries globally. So you may not know them as a household name, it's on Energizer, but they are in everything you use. And they are planning on moving. They're already an American-based company. They're based in Pennsylvania. And like, for example, this system is a Buy America compliant system. The one thing that is not American is the cells. And so those are going to start coming over and being made here. And I know they're not alone in that, because there is this push now, the Biden administration is pushing Buy America and making it difficult for companies to continue using Chinese products, including cells. So I do think that there is a push to bring things here. So geopolitically speaking, I think that is over time going to be better for us here in the States. So I just wanted to speak to that quickly.
That's not fair. Your daughter's up there. Okay. Okay, I can follow up with you afterwards.
Yeah, that seems fair.
A little bit of an answer and a question. Speaking on state policy, state law policy, New Hampshire at present has a renewable portfolio standard of 25.2%. Vermont is 75%, New York is 70%, Canada is 90%, Maine is 80%, going to 100 by 2050. Would you agree that if the legislature in New Hampshire stepped up that renewable portfolio standard to 50 or 75%, that it would help it would be a motivator to utilities and to other providers?
It absolutely would. So the renewable portfolio standards are a main driver of RECs, which for intermittent renewables like solar and wind is a key revenue source. And, increasing the demand, would raise the price until supply was there to match that. So it would absolutely make a difference and spur more investment in renewables in New Hampshire.
All right, any other last questions? Okay, you've had your hand up for.
I've had my hand up. Hi, Natalie Treat with the Northeast Clean Energy Council. We're sort of a regional partner to Clean Energy New Hampshire, and I've been working on battery storage issues, the development of wholesale distribution tariffs, so front-of-the-meter programs in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, and now looking at Maine. We haven't heard anything about that. As my seat partner said, you don't have goals here in New Hampshire in the same way for an RPS. But this question is, well, Amy, you talked about the programs that the Eversource programs offer in other states, and it's been indicated that these are pilot programs here in New Hampshire, so they're presumably much smaller, much less uptake for behind the meter. And then on the front of the meter side, there's nothing yet. Have you heard of, and how, for the industry partners, how important is that to have front-of-the-meter programs like wholesale distribution tariffs to incentivize batteries to be built I mean, presumably without goals, there's still, if you're building more solar anyways, you're going to need to match the load. For the policymakers in the room, what's the value of having ways to incentivize solar to do the things that, batteries to do the things that we want it to do for the grid in terms of reliability and peak shaving and all of that. So sort of overarching question on New Hampshire, what can we do for more programs behind the meter and front of the meter? So I'd be interested in any ideas from the panel.
Thank you, Natalie.
Since it was sort of directed to me, I can take it. I stay in my lane a lot here. I run the programs, all the sort of like regulatory and policy stuff, to be honest, is a bit behind my wheelhouse. I think I am, connected to the front of the meter like effort in Connecticut because that distribution tariff will sort of determine, what we need to offer from an incentive perspective to help make developers, close to whole without putting too much burden on ratepayers. So there's sort of that trade-off. I think that this pay for performance through our energy efficiency and demand response portfolio is really like what we are authorized to do in New Hampshire. Now we're targeting that like ISO system peak. It's pay for performance only. The upfront incentive that I mentioned for New Hampshire Clean Energy Fund, that's outside of the energy efficiency portfolio. The upfront incentive for the Energy Storage Solutions Program, that is also outside of the energy efficiency, demand response portfolio. So that separation of paying or compensating for performance with reducing like the ISO system peak and all the sort of, benefit streams that those generate through our, BCR within the EE portfolio, that's a different standard than we're sort of held to for things that are outside. So if there are, like we're saying, if there's procurements for battery storage systems that, are blatantly geared to provide upfront funding and not so much only limited to compensation for performance, I think that distinction is really important because trying to sort of ram all of the incentives through this pay for performance sort of mechanism, which is really the only place we have now for a behind the meter perspective, like it borders on like ethically not correct. So that's where I think we get concerned. That's why we set that 150% cap, because we saw a lot of these oversized batteries. For example, like at a dog kennel, they want to put in a 4.9 megawatt battery, and that's like, okay, no, like this should be a front of the meter asset and need to go through the proper protocols so that we're not burdening, these blowing up our program budgets and, taking ratepayer dollars and putting it toward that. So I think that's where the concern comes in for us. Like we're happy to go through the proper channels. We just don't want to, believe me, we have our customers to think about too. We want to see the storage, but we've got to remember, like we can't fund it all through, taxing our ratepayers.
And you will see the growth of the demand for front of the meter storage. Do you anticipate being proactive in introducing some programs for front of the meter? Maybe the year doctor.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'll probably get pegged. I'll get brought into the conversation. Am I going to be the one making the decisions? Like, no.
Any other thoughts from panelists? We have 30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I think obviously making it easier to charge our batteries without those kinds of fees being in place would be great. I think, for form where we've been building projects, where we have contracts for projects, are not in New England right now. And you'll see, we have contracts with a number of utilities in Colorado, in Georgia, in Minnesota. But where you have organized markets, states like New York and California, we are building projects, and those are where states have put programs in place to support this kind of technology coming to the market. So I think, there's gonna need to be support, there's gonna need to be a program that helps close that gap where the market fundamentals just aren't gonna be there for project developers to come in and build projects. So you wanna see them show up here, we've gotta support them getting off the ground and commercializing.
All right, so we are at time. Honestly, there are a ton of people in this room, and there's our panelists may be available after. We now have scheduled another networking break and then into lunch. So unless you see the panelists head for the door because they've got another meeting, they may be available. If you need to yell at me about code enforcement, I will be around for the rest of the day. But I know these guys all have very beautiful business cards if you'd like to just take those and hit the road yourself. But thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you, panelists.